I'm going to talk a little bit about why in particular high achievers really struggle with this believing in yourself, um, and holding faith in frequency. Okay, and then I'm going to give some very practical tips and tricks, if you like, some strategies around how to cultivate faith and frequency and become a frequency master, right? So hopefully that sounds good to everyone. So I have some unusual perspectives on frequency in general. Um, I see that frequency is really a product of consciousness, right? It's a product of conscious awareness. Um, and sometimes people look at it from the perspective of emotion and feeling, and I think that's an element of it, but it's really more about awareness and choice and decision, right? So this is the first thing. Now, in terms of frequency, some of you might have come across, and I've actually forgotten the name of it, but it's basically like a scale which shows the different frequencies and vibrations, etc. I'm not a big fan of that because it's one of those things that sort of places love at the pinnacle or some version of these things. And my personal view and my experience of doing this work for a very long time is that this is not the most important frequency. So when we are talking about holding the frequency and being in the frequency gym, what is it that we're actually talking about? What type of frequency? Because there are many, many different types of frequencies we can be holding, right? So this is what I have gathered and have experimented with, and I can offer to you as sound advice, right? The most important frequency that we want to hold is the frequency of faith, of belief, and related to that, the frequency of power, right? Agentic, if you like, the frequency of having agency, the idea that you can control your reality, that you can influence it. Okay, in the sort of non-spiritual world, one of the ways you can describe this in a psychological sense is locus of control. So this is the idea that you are the source of what is happening to you and around you, right? And the research is really interesting on this. I've talked about this before, which is that people who perceive themselves to have agency over their circumstances, so that means they have an internal locus of control, they get better results than people who have an external locus of control, which is people who believe that their reality and what they're experiencing is a product and a result of their external circumstances and other people in their environment, etc. Okay, and that's really interesting, right? That just even shifting your perspective to your internal power and agency can have an impact on the outcomes, right? But this is all, this is just another data point that confirms what we already know. So I don't believe in fluffy feelings as the frequency that we are meant to hold. I believe in creator consciousness, the idea of power, the idea of faith, and internal locus of control. I want to talk a little bit about faith in particular, because it does go hand in hand with frequency, but it's kind of what I've said in some other places, which is that you, as spiritual practitioners in particular, but also just as entrepreneurs, because what I've noticed is that very successful entrepreneurs are doing this unconsciously anyway. Our job is to bridge this current reality with a future possibility, right? There are many, many different possibilities. And entrepreneurship really is about how can I pull from an alternative possibility that doesn't yet exist, how can I pull it down into this realm, right? That's basically everything to do with being a business owner and an entrepreneur, right? So in order to do that, you need to center the alternative. You need to make that the center of your experience and your focus. Yeah. So for me, this is what it really means to hold the frequency, to hold faith, right? We're all about centering an alternative possibility, the one that we want to see manifest, more so than centering and reacting to what we are seeing all of the time. Yeah. Now, so it's kind of obvious why this is important, because if we don't do that, this is the alternative. We are going to find ourselves reactive, and we're going to find ourselves in a sort of a karmic cycle where what is happening is impacting our feelings and therefore our actions. So, for example, let me just use a very, very simple business one, right? If we are experiencing in our business that sales are declining or they're not where we want them to be, okay, focusing on that is going to make us feel bad. Then feeling bad is most likely for most people not going to contribute to the actions that will enable you to come out of that situation, okay? What's then going to happen is you end up in a negative spiral. We've probably all experienced something like this, right? It's the same in relationships. You get into an argument, you focus on what it was that your partner did that you didn't like, and then you end up feeling negative about the entire relationship, and then you're in a negative spiral. And the negative energy is feeding off of each other, okay? This is what avoid. So this is why it's important, yeah? So now let's talk a little bit about what this phenomenon that I find, okay, of why is it so hard to stay in the frequency? Why is it so hard to believe? Why is it so hard to believe in ourselves in particular, okay? Particularly when it comes to high achievers, because this for me is fascinating, that we have this vision of this business that we want to create. We have this vision of this life that we want to create for ourselves, okay? And we have all of these qualifications and experiences and, you know, knowledge and information. My goodness, do we have lots of information? We've consumed all the YouTube videos, we've done all of the courses, we have done all of the coaching and the mentoring, right? And despite that, we still have this perpetual doubt. What is going on? So there are a few things going on, but the one that I want to highlight today is that some of this is by design. Some of this is by design. And I won't go into all of the details as to who has designed it in this way, because I don't think it's as simple as that. But let me give you a really interesting example. So there was an article in the Financial Times many years ago now, and I've never forgotten it. And it was talking about professional services in particular. So you guys know my background is in professional services as an accountant and management consultant, but that also includes like lawyers, investment bankers. Like we're all in this professional services world, okay? And it talked about the fact that big companies, so think about the McKinseys, etc., they all hire a particular profile of person. They hire people who are smart, right, of course, and educated, but also have high degrees of self-doubt. Do you know who else does this as well? The CIA, and actually a lot of sort of three-letter agency type organizations, okay, secret services all around the world, they also do this. And there is a reason for that, because people who are highly competent but have a high degree of self-doubt and in some instances low self-esteem are extremely useful to corporations, right, to systems, to institutions. You become less and less useful to these institutions the more you have agency and believe in yourself and your ability to create your own reality and your own situation for yourself, okay? So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because often when we talk about frequency and belief and faith, it's very, very easy to beat yourself up and say that it's your fault for not believing enough, for not believing in yourself enough, etc. But it isn't really. That's like part of the story. It's not the entire story. A lot of that is engineered, designed, and upheld by and perpetuated by the systems that we all participate in, right? And reinforced through education, and particularly higher education. So I'm going to see what you're saying here, Laurie. So this is interesting. So when studying government and international security, I was told that grade A type A's are who will get hired, but I was a grade A type C and would not be hired. So basically, or you've had too much self-awareness and self-belief, yeah, for them. So it's a really interesting comment. So yeah, so this is what's happening, right? So I want you to let yourself off the hook a little bit, okay, in terms of why you're finding this so difficult. Okay, so let me go back to my notes and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. So the key thing with this is if you've created a system where it relies on this kind of profile of person who works very hard, is intelligent, but fundamentally doesn't believe in themselves, okay? You are able to essentially harvest their energy, okay? Harvest their energy in order to build whatever it is that you're trying to build. And not all of this is conscious. A lot of this is unconscious, yeah? Because sometimes it's never described in these direct ways, right? It's described as you want people who get it. You want people who are all in, who are bought in, who buy into this. This is the language that we use which is very soft language to describe something that can actually be quite sinister, okay? So people like this work extremely hard, and then it's easy to harvest their energy, okay? And why is it that people even want to do this? Or why are they so desperate for so many people to be working for them in this way, right? One, there are a lot of people and energies, yeah, because not just human beings, who have lost their connection to the source, to infinite intelligence, right, to the source of all possibility. And so the only way they can access energy is through other people, okay? And so many of us, if you've been brought up in these systems, you also learn how to harvest other people's energies without realizing it, okay? And then when you have an awakening, you start to understand that you have direct access to the source of all things yourself, right? But not everybody has that consciousness. And so it's helpful to have people working for you because you don't want to work hard. You want someone else to do it for you so that you don't have to work so hard, right? And not only do you not want to have to work so hard, you want other people that work for you who you do not have to pay a significant amount of money to, right? And this is the other big part of why this is all happening, because people who are highly intelligent and work really hard but also have low self-esteem and low self-belief, they do not advocate for themselves when it comes to compensation, okay? So you also get these resources comparatively cheaply, which enables you to raise your profit margins and all of the things, right? Are you guys with me? Hopefully this is making a lot of sense. So this is some of the stuff that's going on, right? And there is this feeling, I think, and we saw it a bit in 2020 with the Great Resignation, that these systems, okay, and energies that uphold them are worried that we will figure it out, okay? They're worried that we will figure it out and then the whole thing will collapse because they don't know another source of energy to uphold what they have built, yeah? So there is a lot invested in maintaining the narrative. One of the narratives that I often hear, which makes me so sad, right, is that not everybody can be an entrepreneur, because if everyone was an entrepreneur, a number of jobs wouldn't get done. And this is not true. Is this not true at all? One example that I gave was in the area that I live in now, basically live in the woods, okay? There are people who volunteer to clean it up just because they feel called to do that and want to protect the environment. If we are all in our own power, in our own agency, things will get done. But the contract between capital and labour, if you like, would be renegotiated and it would happen on different terms. Anyway, that's a whole sidebar. I could do an entire class just on that, right? So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this and why I want to share this with everybody is because one of the lessons I learned from growing up with a narcissistic, a mentally ill, abusive mother, right, is your personal power is not for negotiation. And this is why I've come to understand that it's linked so heavily to faith and frequency, right? This feeling of personal power. If you are struggling to hold the frequency, it's very much linked to how you feel when it comes to power. Do you feel powerful or do you not? Do you feel like you have agency or do you not? Okay. So they're very linked together. One of my favorite movies to kind of illustrate this, if you guys have seen it, is Captain Marvel. And I don't remember all of the details of the movie. I need to rewatch it, but I remember seeing it in the cinema and just being like, what on earth? Because, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but quite a big bit of the story is that she has a lot of powers, but they're suppressed by the people that are looking after her, who are raising her and who are mentoring her. And at some point in the film, she realizes this is what's happening, that they've been training her to be afraid of her own power, and then she comes into it. And it's just, and when I watched it, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is my story. This is what's happened to me, right? So if you want to feel like getting your power back, I encourage you to go and watch that film. Okay. So so that's the why, right? This is the why. Now I want to talk a little bit about the ladder of belief. What is it that we're trying to achieve with this frequency? And being able to hold the perspective of the possibility that we're trying to ensure manifests, right? So it's a spectrum from understanding that something is a possibility, yeah, to knowing it's a possibility for you, to then knowing that it's likely to happen for you, to knowing it's inevitable, right? It's a spectrum from belief to knowing. And holding the frequency is about holding the knowing, holding the knowing, holding the knowing, right? Despite what you were seeing. Another thing I will share that's a good way of describing all of this, right, is the mirror principle. Some of you might have come across this. And it's this idea that we often try to change the reflection that we're looking at, right, instead of changing the source. So when something bad has happened, we are often looking at the external circumstances of what has happened and trying to change that or reacting to that instead of going to the source, right? Source of it being our emotion, imagination, our whatever we have planned, our decision, and changing it at the source. So holding your frequency is very much about almost ignoring what you were seeing and anchoring into the source of the reflection, not the reflection itself. So I'm sure many of you would have heard that. So let me get into now some very, very practical things, okay? And then we'll do some questions and some hot seats if people want to do that afterwards, right? So how do you actually cultivate faith? How do you eliminate doubt, okay? How do you, and what do you do in the frequency gym? So number one, which you won't be surprised, is you need to anchor into your own unique destiny, which is the source of your desire. Because if you are trying to hold the frequency around something that is not even meant for you, you are going to wonder why you're always struggling. So please just start with something that is meant for you and that you have genuine, authentic desire around, okay? I'm never going to stop banging on about this, guys. Like, just call the School of Destiny for a reason. So number two, yeah, is this is all about your mental diet. What you see with your eyes, what you read, what you hear, okay? There is a Bible verse which says faith comes by hearing and hearing from the word of God, hearing by the word of God, okay? And I think it's such I did understand it, but I understand it in such a bigger way now that I have come out of these particular systems of thought, which is that it all comes down to what you are feeding yourself, okay? And you can't start feeding yourself the right thing in the moments when your frequency is going to come off, right? And you can't start this when you are already feeling low or something bad has happened. You need to be doing it perpetually all the time, okay? So I'll give you an example about, which I've told the story before about in 2020, I decided to get married and I was very, very, very single. And I decided by the end of the year that I would be married, right? And I'll give you the end of the story, which is it didn't happen at the end of 2020, but it did happen in the middle of 2021, right? And it all happened in a 7-month period. It was all miraculous and very amazing, right? Story for another time. But one of the things that I did was I really brainwashed myself with stories of people who had achieved what it was that I was trying to achieve, right? I wanted to meet someone, I wanted to know pretty quickly, and I wanted it to all happen very quickly, and I didn't want to date a lot of people in order to get there. I didn't want to kiss a lot of frogs. So I had very much my parameters and I only consumed stories, content, videos. I looked for things that would basically confirm to me that this was possible. So through other people's stories, I was keeping myself in the frequency to the point that it never occurred to me that it wasn't going to happen. Even when I got to the end of the year, December, and it hadn't happened, I was, I didn't feel knocked in any way. My frequency was still high because I'd done so much work. It's like, and if I ever saw anything or heard anyone say anything that was counter to what it was that I was planning, it it couldn't even survive 2 seconds in my consciousness, right? It was getting switched off. I wasn't listening to it. I wasn't seeing it. Okay. So I was reading books, watching videos, doing all of the things. This is how you actually reprogram your mind and your subconscious and your consciousness. You can do affirmations and all of those things, but in my experience, you want to use natural programming because let's look at it this way. The cultivation of faith and frequency is basically the same process that you would have been unconsciously participating in as you were growing up and being conditioned, right? Because when we're growing up, we're all being conditioned by our parents, by society, by media, by all of the things, by our peers, right? Our friends. So this is how we get conditioned, and it takes a very long time. The first 7 years of a child's life is basically just conditioning, where they watch and then they repeat. Yeah. So this is the exact process that you need to go through to develop your frequency, to become a frequency master, to develop your faith. Okay, so I do like a good affirmation and all of the things, but I think it's easier to just tap into the natural ways in which we are conditioned. Yeah, that our brain and our minds are used to already. Yeah. So this is number two. A third piece that's related to that is the environment and who you surround yourself with. So this can be in a virtual way. The first one, the one before this is more about content, but actual people. So I had a friend at the time who was so negative about her life. She really she didn't want to be single anymore. And she would just never do anything about it. And I had to get rid of that friend because she was so depressing. There were many, many reasons, but being around her was so depressing that it was affecting my frequency. So she had to go. She had to go because I knew that I was calling in something very, very powerful. Okay. So that's environment and people who you surround yourself with. And all of this is really about getting micro evidence, right? Because evidence is the overwhelming thing that is going to impact your frequency. And it doesn't need to be personal evidence. It can be evidence of seeing what you want with in other situations, yeah? And then the last thing that I want to say here is that you need to forgive yourself in many ways. So you need to forgive yourself for the times when you don't hold the frequency perfectly. But in general, you need to step into the feeling of worthiness, yeah, of being worthy. And that requires you to let yourself off the hook for all of the reasons why you might feel like you're not worthy of what it is that you're asking for, holding the faith and frequency around, okay? So the main thing I want to say about the frequency gym and developing faith and cultivating it is it's not an emotion. It's not even really a decision. There is a decision point in it, as in deciding I'm going to have faith, okay? But it is a practice. It's something that needs to be cultivated actively through what you are consuming and what you are letting into your spirit, okay? It's not magical in one sense at all. It's not a magical thing. I think some people are like, I just wish I had more belief, and it's just not, it's not a feeling, okay? You can't whip yourself up into an emotional frenzy and have faith. Some people try and do that, but what I've realized is that's a form of spiritual bypassing, actually. That isn't real faith, and then you wonder why you're not getting what it is that you've asked for, what you're calling in. It's a muscle that is developed, which is why I think actually the frequency gym is a lovely concept, okay? So I think that is everything that I wanted to say about this.